So in 1985, our founder, John Andrews, started a state-based think tank, eventually became the Independence Institute, and for 31 years, we have been educating Coloradans about the principles of free markets and personal and economic freedom. And people often ask, well, what does that mean practically? What does a think tank do practically? Well, a couple of things that might come into your everyday life. Think about, especially in this room, think about standardized concealed carry across the state. Your flat income tax rate of 4.63%. We actually should be able to do our income taxes on really an index card. So for all the checkoffs on the bottom, that wasn't us. So school choice in education, transparency in government. And one reason why you all actually get to vote on tax increases, and you'll have several of them on the ballot this November, you get to say yes or no because of something known as the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, TABOR. Those are all things that at one time may have seemed crazy, but groups like the Independence Institute, we incubate those. We work with other folks who agree with those principles. We nurture those ideas, educate Coloradans about it, and eventually they become mainstream. They become normal, they become accepted, they become reality, they become law. So that's what we do at a state-based think tank. Now, we don't do it in a vacuum. We're not lone rangers, despite what my boss might say. We do this with other organizations. We have to have coalitions. It's one of our strengths, building those coalitions. Many of you are from organizations that work with us. And it starts at the Freedom Embassy in Denver. We like to say freedom occupies Denver. Freedom has a safe space at 727 16th Avenue, just a few blocks from the state capitol. You're welcome. You can wear your Free Market Capitalist t-shirt there. Please come visit us. We actually have a life-size statue of Thomas Jefferson right in the front. We are not somebody who throws our founding fathers under the bus. We embrace their brilliance. So you'll know you're there when you see the life-size statue of Thomas Jefferson. And so it's only natural that we would partner with another great organization like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is the nation's largest voluntary, nonpartisan organization for state lawmakers who are dedicated to the crazy principles of free markets, limited government, and dare I say federalism. The 10th Amendment matters. And I have been to ALEC conferences, in full disclosure. I know firsthand, it's not a coven. They do not practice witchcraft, despite what you might hear from the Colorado Independent. It is actually a bunch of lawmakers who believe that billions upon billions of individual decisions made in what might be the messiness of a free market is actually best for prosperity, best for personal and economic freedom, rather than a command and control economy. So it's not dark magic. It is just lawmakers who believe that you are in the best position to make decisions about your own life. So that's why we work with partners like ALEC, and you'll get to hear from them today. The whole point of today is to talk about the state's economic competitiveness. Where are we? Where are we going? And Jonathan Williams, who is the author of, is this the 9th edition? 9th edition of Rich States, Poor States, which looks at economic competitiveness, will let you know, where does Colorado rank? Then you'll hear from my boss, Jon Caldara, talking about what we can do based on what we know from Jonathan Williams as one of the co-authors. Then what do we do? Where do we go? And then you're going to hear from State Treasurer Walker Stapleton, who, unless you've been under a rock, he has been the most vocal crusader to put our public employee pension system on a path to solvency. If you truly care about PERA, not just as a taxpayer, but as actually a PERA member, you care about a PERA member, we want it to be solvent for them too. And Treasurer Walker Stapleton has been leading the charge on that. So before we get into today's program, I do want to recognize a couple of people, if you don't, or it will indulge me for just a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recognize the state elected officials who are here today. And if you would just raise your hands, just kind of wave, let us know, and then hold applause. We can thank them afterward, after I've named them all. So we have State Treasurer Walker Stapleton. We have Secretary of State Wayne Williams, who's going to be a busy man over the next few weeks. Senator Owen Hill. State Senator Kent Lambert, another champion of PERA solvency. We have Representative Yannick Yoshi. Great, there he is, thank you. State Representative Gordon Kleinschmidt. Representative Paul Lundeen. Okay, so now we know who RSVP'd and didn't show. Feel free to out them on Twitter or on Facebook. El Paso County District Attorney Don May. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. All right, so thank you to all of our elected officials for being here today. And again, as I mentioned, we do this with partners. And so I'd like to thank the El Pomar Foundation, Kyle Hibble, who is the COO.
And an elected official.
Oh, that's right, and CU Regents, CU Board of Regents. You guys have a little bit of a race going on as well.
We do. Vote for Heidi Goodall.
Yes! And we have their Executive Vice President, Matt Carpenter, here.
You also have Steve Durham here from the State Board of
Nobody cares about that.
Amy just said we care about education.
He just departed a couple minutes ago, but he was here and had breakfast.
Okay.
That's what
And I'd also like to thank our El Paso Club member host, Joe Woodford. Are you here?
Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much. So to kick us off today, we have the co-author of the 9th edition of Rich States, Poor States, and the VP, the Vice President for the Center for State Fiscal Policy Reform for the American Legislative Exchange Council, Jonathan Williams.
Good morning, everybody, and greetings from the land of make-believe, Washington, D.C., where I come from. As the great President Reagan, who's been invoked already this morning, said, Washington is an island surrounded by reality. And every time I have a chance to hop off that island and into reality, it's a good day for me. And I couldn't help but thinking about this when I was coming down the highway and I saw the stretch of highway. There's the Ronald Reagan highway here, and I was like, this is an awesome part of the world right here. So it is good to be with you. Thank you to our friends at the Independence Institute for hosting this event with us. Good to see so many friendly faces in the audience, lots of ALEC members who have been involved with us over the years. And as Amy mentioned, in our fight to restore free markets, limited government, and federalism across this great country. And as was mentioned, there's been some left-wing groups that have taken pot shots at us over the years, but I say what, as a guy that I know from West Texas once said, dogs don't bark at parked cars. If you're going someplace and you're doing something right, they're going to come after you. And that's okay, because it's so important, the issues that we're fighting for, that we're happy to stand in this gap and fight those issues, because when we're looking at Washington, everyone always asks me, what's happening in Washington? And I always have to tell them, nothing positive is happening in Washington when it comes to these issues, on fiscal issues. Anybody remember the last time that Washington fundamentally remade its tax code? It was 30 years ago to this week that President Ronald Reagan signed the 1986 Tax Reform Act into law. It has been 30 years. At the state level, we're seeing some fantastic things happen. But backing up for a second, what's happening in Washington? I think this is silly season. It's obviously campaign season. It's a very strange year, no doubt about it. But the one thing, left, right, center, independent, libertarian, anybody can agree we're going to have gridlock in Washington for the next 4 years, regardless of who's elected President of the United States. So what does that mean? It means that our work at the state and local level becomes even more important. The things of restoring federalism, the things about reducing people's tax burdens, right-sizing government to make the needs work for states and localities across the country. We're going to have a busy next 4 years, no doubt about it. So what am I talking about today? I wanted to talk about a few different issues. First of all, I want to talk about spending, secondly, pensions, and finally, taxes, and then talk about how Colorado ranks in those areas based on our research in Rich States, Poor States, which you have a copy of the book in front of you. I'll refer to the Colorado page a little bit later and show how, unfortunately, the news today is not great. Colorado once ranked number 2 in economic outlook in Rich States, Poor States, just as recently as 2010, I believe. Today you've fallen precipitously and fallen roughly about 20 spots as many other states have taken pro-growth actions. Just in fact last year, 17 states substantially reduced their tax burden. The year before that, 14 states. The year before that, 17 states. So while Washington is gridlocked, we've seen states take the lead on tax reform. Now let me just pause for a moment to tell you my personal story as to why I think this issue is just so impactful to me. Anybody been to Saginaw, Michigan before? A couple, right? So my hometown of Saginaw, Michigan is a town, unfortunately today, people say they're from. It's a town that in 1960 had 100,000 Americans as population base. Today, we have 47,000 people living in Saginaw. My parents are both public school teachers, members of the union. I go back to see them often. And what you see, the devastation of what that's meant in my hometown, the loss of economic vitality and economic opportunity when our graduates go through K-12, and we spend a lot on educating our graduates, and they go through some great institutions of higher education. We're educating other folks' workforce in other states because there's not the economic opportunities in Michigan there once was. So I often ask legislators, think about your hometown or your district. What would it mean? Imagine for a minute your hometown shrunk by 50%. What would it look like? What are the stores on Main Street would be gone? What are the small businesses would be packed up and boarded up? What hospitals, what schools wouldn't be there? That's what motivates me to make sure that we're following the free market principles that will lead not just my home state of Michigan, but states all across the country to a more prosperous future. And if we can do it right, maybe Washington, D.C. learns a lesson and takes a lesson from the states, because after all, our founders, the way they set up our laboratories of democracy is the federal government wasn't supposed to be the place where all the decisions happen. That should be the 50 state capitals, the local levels of government. So let's create some case studies and say what works, and let's follow those things. And maybe that's our path out of $20 trillion of national debt at the federal level. So one of the things I always like to talk about is you can't say really much about tax policy or fiscal discipline without addressing the spending side of the equation, because it's obviously one side of the two-sided fiscal coin at the state level. Outside of us in Washington that don't balance budgets, we print money when we have shortfalls. States actually do have to balance budgets. And one of my favorite economists, anybody here a fan of Thomas Sowell out at Hoover? And what a great resource, a national treasure really. He had the great line that the first law of economics is a scarcity of resources, right? But the first law of politics is to ignore the first law of economics. And folks, therein lies our problem, that if we don't get spending growth under control, we're going to have a very hard time, both at the state and federal level, of ever getting taxes under control and getting your tax burdens down. Now, to jump ahead just a moment about Colorado specifically, that's why I'm such a big fan of Tabor. I really am. I think the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights in Colorado is the national gold standard for how you can control government spending and put taxpayers back in control of their own destiny when it comes to tax policy. And you know why I think that? Not just studying this for the last decade or more, traveling to all 50 states working with state lawmakers. I can guarantee this is the case because the minute another state talks about adopting Tabor, the left wing goes unhinged. They really do. Just last year, the North Carolina Senate put it in their budget to have a Tabor provision to limit the growth of spending and allow taxpayers the authority to reject spending and tax increases. And within hours of that ink drying on the proposed budget, the left had gone unhinged, both in North Carolina, nationally. They were getting ready to fly people from Colorado to talk about how it supposedly killed the state of Colorado. And that's why I think it's so important. You have to balance spending and taxes, and Tabor is the most elegant, successful way that's ever been tried, I think, in state constitution across the country. And so we are doing everything we can. We want to work more with Independence Institute as well on this, because I know they have some great stuff coming up on showing the history and the success of Tabor. But there's so many state lawmakers across this country that are elected in 2010 and 12 and 14 at this point, that they don't know the history of Tabor. They don't know the story. And it's really important to tell the true story of Tabor. So briefly, let me talk about one of the, I think, the largest threat to state finances long-term, and that is unfunded pension obligations. And I really appreciate the work that Treasurer Stapleton has done here, and so many of our legislators. Senator Lambert, I know, has been all over this issue. Even before I was all over this issue, he came to ALEC before the crash of 2008, when everybody started paying attention to this and said, we've got a problem. And this is building under the surface. It's like an iceberg. We might see the tip of the iceberg right now, but we've got a massive problem under the water when it comes to unfunded pension obligations. So last week, my team at the ALEC Center for State Fiscal Reform put out a brand new research piece on the estimating unfunded obligations by state, using more realistic accounting than state and local governments generally use. So state and local governments, on average now, assume 7.37% rate of return each and every year for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. They're basically betting that they're going to beat Warren Buffett in the stock market, where the bond rating agencies and everyone else is telling us we should be much more prudent with these assumptions. Now, what does that number move to if you use a more realistic rate of accounting and rate of return? Nationally, $5.6 trillion. Now, a trillion here and a trillion there might be rounding errors in Washington when we're talking about our debt and our unfunded liabilities, but at the state level, that's real money. And it breaks down to $17,427 for every man, woman, and child across this nation to pay that unfunded liability of $5.6 trillion. It is really interesting. And I think there's an opportunity here to bring together a left-right coalition, potentially, on pensions, because nationally, we've seen Puerto Rico, we've seen Illinois, we've seen New Jersey, we've seen Detroit. A lot of those case studies that we're seeing, who ends up with the short end of the stick? You know, many times it's taxpayers, sometimes it's workers, but a lot of times it's government services as well. So in Illinois, this statistic just shocked me when I read it. In Illinois, over the last 5 years, out of every new dollar of education that's gone out to the schools, 89 cents out of that dollar has been used for pension costs. And only 11 cents of every dollar in Illinois has gone towards teacher salaries, textbooks, and all the other things we're told when they ask for more revenue that are for the children. 89 cents out of every new dollar, 5 years in Illinois. That is why the left needs to pay attention to this issue. And even that right-wing ideologue, Rahm Emanuel, mayor of Chicago, former chief of staff to President Obama, has said, we cannot afford to choose between pensions and police officers or pensions and paved streets. It gets down to an issue of core government services that pension costs are crowding out across the states, across this nation. Of course, then there's the threat to tax policy. And when we look at competitiveness in rich states, poor states, and how competitive states need to be when it comes to taxes, pensions are, I think, the largest threat going forward. So, what do we do in rich states, poor states? And how does Colorado fare? So I love talking about tax policy. Tax policy is fun, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to convince you of that fact. Now here's the problem. Most Americans think of tax policy on April 14th at 11 p.m. when they're running really late trying to get those last documents and file their 1040s, right? That's when I think about it sometimes. I'm really a pissed off person at April 14th at 11 p.m., let me tell you that. But tax policy is fun. Now you have to be a little bit of a wonk to get into it. I am a tax economist by training. You all know the difference between an introverted tax economist and an extroverted tax economist, right? No? All right, I will tell you that. The introverted tax economist looks at his shoes when he talks to you. But on the other hand, the extroverted tax economist looks at your shoes when he talks to you. So that's the world that I come from, and I've been told if you set the bar really, really low, as a presenter. You'll do really well. So I'm a tax economist by training. So let's get into Colorado and how you rank in rich states, poor states. Because what we've done in this book with Art Laffer and Steve Bohr over these 9 years of putting it together is look at just how Americans are continuing to vote with their feet, vote with their pocketbooks from state to state. And as it turns out, they continue to vote towards states that keep taxes low and have reasonable business climates. That's the 10,000 foot view of rich states, poor states over about 1,000 pages in 10 years, is be more like Texas and less like California is really the short one, the one sentence version. So Colorado, as I mentioned, has fallen from number 2 in economic outlook all the way down to number 22 and then slightly up to number 21. So what's gone on? Obviously with the Tabor timeout for the 5 years, that certainly ratcheted up spending levels to what could have been more affordable state government. But as I was going category by category, pretty much every single category, the 15 categories that are listed here, Colorado has fallen relative to the rest of the nation. Now, it's not always because you've done something bad in a category. It's just because so many other states are moving in the right direction on an annual basis that, as I like to say, you can fall behind just by standing still as a state in this very competitive race for capital, for jobs, for income growth across the state capitals. Now, obviously, a few things really stand out when you look at the metrics of Colorado here. Debt service is a share of tax revenue, 47th out of the 50 states. Only several states in the nation have higher debt service cost. You look at where minimum wage cost is significantly higher than it was back in the first edition of this book. Now you're 38th in that category where you used to be at the federal minimum wage. And then when you look at there's property tax burden, sales tax burden, other burdens of government, every single one of them has gone down relative to the rest of the nation, gone down in the bad sense in terms of other states being more competitive. And the other one that really stuck out was the size of the government workforce has grown in Colorado pretty precipitously over the last few years. And I think probably that has something to do with the Tabor timeout as well. So as you can see, 21st, it's not California, it's not Illinois, it's not New York at 50th. However, if you were a state marketing director trying to boost your state and get businesses to do business and get people to move to your state, would you go out there with the marketing campaign to say, hey, we're number 21, come and invest in our state? No, it doesn't work that way, right? So states are competing. It's a very, very competitive race to the top these days when it comes to competitiveness. Texas has been leading the way for many years. Utah has done very well. Arizona has been a top 5 state. You've got a very difficult region here to compete with. Wyoming obviously being a no income tax state. That's actually one of the key findings in rich states, poor states, is just being that income taxes are some of the most damaging ways to raise tax revenue. Now, all taxes matter. We know this from Econ 101, right? When you tax something, you get less of it. When you tax something less, you get more of it. But not all taxes are created equally. And when you look at the various ways that state and local governments raise their revenue for core functions of government, because after all, I don't think we're anarchists, right? I mean, we're not anarchists. We want some core level of government to provide those key services like roads and bridges and things like that we all need. How do you get there while not draining economic competitiveness? And it turns out that while all taxes matter, taxes on consumption are less damaging than taxes on income. And that's not just our survey from the 50 states, that's groups like the OECD who follow this on an international basis and track various forms of taxes on international competitiveness as well. So we look at the 9 states that do not tax personal income. Wyoming being one of them, Nevada being another, Texas being another, Florida another big example of those states. And we look at their job creation, we look at their income growth, we look at their population growth, and gasp, even this, we look at their revenue growth. Because you look at the folks on the left and they say you need to have high taxes to get lots of revenue. Well, it turns out the states that don't tax personal income have better revenue growth over the last decade than the states that have the highest income taxes like California, New York, and all the states that I mentioned. So how do those liberal states go about competing? Because after all, you can't ignore the competition that's going on among states. Well, it gets back to Ronald Reagan's view of what the liberals think of the economy, which was, if you remember, if it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it, right? That's exactly what they're doing. They've taxed businesses out of existence, and now they want to go in and pick winners and losers and subsidize. Anybody seen the TV ads that the state of New York has been running? I know they've been running them nationally. They've been running here. $53 million the state of New York has paid for this national ad campaign to say, come into New York for lower taxes. Now, first of all, if you're a state that has good enough tax policy, you don't need to run a national ad campaign to say, come in and do business in our state. Business folks are pretty sophisticated folks and they can figure it out on their own. Secondly, what's the return on investment? Let's just look at this. According to New York's own numbers, $53 million spent. How many jobs do you think were created with those $53 million? Any guesses? Well, we've got pessimists here, too. 76 jobs, a grand total of 76 jobs for $53 million, and that's not my numbers, that's their numbers of the state of New York. That shows you how cronyism does not work. You need a competitive tax system across the board for everybody. Now let me just close with this. Don't take my word for anything if you don't want to. You know, maybe you're a skeptic, maybe you say, hey, you're just a conservative, I don't believe you. Maybe you're planning for that Thanksgiving dinner with your liberal uncle that you want to have this conversation with. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of Governor Daniel Malloy of Connecticut. Anybody know Daniel Malloy? He was the governor of a state that just lost a small family business known as General Electric. General Electric left Connecticut after years of warning the state, you're raising our taxes, your tax system's not competitive, we're going to leave. They thought they were bluffing, they were wrong. Where did they go? They went to Massachusetts. Now there's a joke in there somewhere. If you lose a state to Massachusetts for lower taxes, you've got real problems. Now, what's the moral of the story? Daniel Malloy's actually had a mea culpa on the issue and said, we've tried to raise taxes and it doesn't work. What we need is economic growth. This is a liberal Democrat, the head of the Democrat Governors Association, and even Daniel Malloy of Connecticut has said that approach to governing doesn't work. The approach to governing that does work is the approach in rich states, poor states. Limited government, free markets, federalism. That's the approach to growth. And I think with what Mr. Caldara is going to say here in a moment, you've got some really good avenues to get Colorado back on the right track. But the thing that I always like to point to that you still have, thank God, is you've got the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights that has your back in the Colorado Constitution. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, John. We are going to have a few minutes at the end so that you all can ask questions. So hold all of your questions for then. So right now, my boss, President of the Independence Institute, Jon Caldara.
Thank you. I think it's adorable that you're angry, pissed off every April 14th. We're pissed off every day. We call it trying to bring out our inner Steve Schuck. Some of you heard this, and I think it's important to do a little talk about why before we get into the how. We're junkies, all right? We jump right into this stuff. There's something magical about this state. There's something that all of us in this room have donated so much of our time, our energy, our intelligence, our wealth in order to try to save the state. And sometimes we have a hard time articulating exactly why we care. Why don't we just leave? I think when you're a kid, you don't understand what your folks are going through. My father, who grew up in the Bronx, got a job with IBM in the 60s, real madman time, good stuff. And he was on the fast track. And if you know IBM, it means IBM stands for I've been moved. So every 2 years, we would bob around to a different town somewhere in the Northeast as he's climbing this ladder. But there was something drawing him out west. I don't think he could ever explain it. I don't think he ever knew why, but he wanted to go out west. He told his bosses in 1970, I want to go out west. And he was such a star player, they decided to give him a huge promotion and send him out west to Chicago. No, I mean, that might be out west when you're in New York. No, west, we go west. And so he turned it down. 6 months later, they offered him the ultimate promotion and to send him out west to St. Louis. At which point he said, thanks, but no thanks. And when you do that to IBM, particularly in 1970, that's, you might work in the file room for a while and that's about it. He ended up taking a job with RCA's computer division in Colorado. He left the whole world he knew to come to Colorado to start a new life, brought 4 kids, a dog, a wife, bought a house you'd never seen, and as you all know from the RCA computers that you're using today, they closed our RCA division, computer division 6 months after we got here. You know, from my point of view, it's like, why is Dad hanging around here all the time? But he worked so that we could grow up here. He ended up finding the work to stay here. And I heard a quick story from a guy named Joe Garosho, I think that's how you pronounce it. He was a music producer. He did Chicago, and he did the Buckinghams, and all these other bands in the 60s and early 70s. And he was working on Blood, Sweat, and Tears album in Chicago, which is unionized. And they were working on their hit song, which was Spinning Wheel, What Goes Up Must Come Down. And they're doing the final tracks. The band's gone out of the studio, so they're dubbing it down. They're taking from many tracks into 2 tracks. The union town, this music producer is not allowed to touch the knobs on the soundboard. That's a union job. So he has to tell the guy, bring that up, no, bring it, no, and he couldn't do it. And so they're dubbing it down. The guy is reading his newspaper, hits a button on the soundboard. It starts erasing the song.
Oh, jeez.
10 seconds to the top. He jumps over the board, finds the stop button, but at that point, there's 10 seconds of the song is gone. They can't bring the band back. They can't do any of this. If you listen to the song, in the middle of it, there's this weird oompa sound that pops out. Just completely different. He overdubbed a whole different thing to fill in this space and tried to fill it in. Next time you listen to it, it'll be very obvious to you. And he said, I can't do this anymore. I have to go somewhere where I am free to do what I need to do the way I need to do it. He ended up going up by Netherland, Colorado, bought a ranch, named it Caribou Ranch, became a recording studio where Elton John, John Lennon, Billy Joel, Chicago, Michael Jackson all did their stuff because he knew somehow, some way there was a freedom to live the way you wanted to live there. I think now, my old man was thinking about where he needed to live. And again, not being able to really articulate it or even understand why you feel this way. Would it be Colorado? I don't think it would be. Not anymore. It's changed. It's changed, and your work shows why it's changing. Now, how is it it's changing? It's because we have an issue we need to look at. We are doing things in an old school way that is just not working anymore. We're very fascinated by personalities. We're like Bobby Soxers, man. We say this guy's got to win, or that guy's got to win, or this guy's got to win. We put our horse on this candidate, or we put our money on this horse. We put our money on that horse, and we build little universes around that character, whoever it is. And that candidate rents offices, he rents phones, he rents computers, he rents databases, and he rents people, maybe for up to 6 months. And all that infrastructure that he builds up, the day after the election, win or lose, comes crashing down. A year and a half later, what do? We bet on different horses, they destroy each other in primaries, we have no system. The left said, let's not bet on horses, let's buy the damn racetrack. That's what they did. Instead of thinking a year out, 90 days out, how many times have we heard we've got our 90-day campaign plan? The left is smoking cigars 90 days out because they already know who's going to win and lose. They built infrastructure. They actually looked at the Independence Institute and said, if only we did that, but 20 times more of that, and with a long-term vision, we can take this state. That's exactly what they did. And they have an ability to think long-term and build infrastructure. Independence has a plan to return Colorado back to this magical place, and I still think it is. I still think when you rip away this aberration that the left has given us over the last decade, the state that my old man came to, the state that this music producer came to, the state that people came to unleash their talents as producers, where they came to write their own autobiography, it's still this same place. We just need to bring that forward. Our job at Independence is to make Colorado synonymous with liberty. That this is the state that you drive your own autobiography. So how do we do this? Well, of course we're a think tank. Think tank sounds really nice. Nobody knows what the hell it is. We put out wonderful papers that nobody reads unless you really agree with us or you really disagree with us. And it's a nice thing to put out there that this is where we want to go. It's an important role that we do. That is only one role. That helps guide us to where we're going. Our job is to build capacities that work throughout the years to draw a level so we know where we're going, so that all of our candidates, so that all of our politicians, so that all of our activists can work together. One of our problems is that we don't work well together. I know this is a shock to you, but our team is the most dysfunctional Thanksgiving Day family dinner ever. Why is it? We don't work well. The left works well because they've got the places to meet. Now, when they win, they all win. When we win, maybe somebody here wins, but we do it out of altruism. We do it out of love of the state and love of this country. The reason we bought a building so close to the Capitol was not so much that we had a place to put our computers. It was a place that all of our teams could come and meet and fight behind closed doors, not out in front of voters. So we do coalition meetings all the time there. We do a monthly big one where we have some 50 groups coming. It's amazing to see the Libertarian Party chair and the Republican Party chair in the same room, to see the Log Cabin Republican, the gay group, and then with the Family Action Council, and all these other groups of people from the state Senate, but the Tea Party folks. Now, these are the people who are always throwing mud at each other, and let me do, they still do it, but they're doing it inside of our building. And it's a lot harder to throw mud at somebody when you know next week you're going to be sitting next to them at a meeting, and we're finally starting to meet. This is the first bit of infrastructure our team has, compared to literally scores of buildings and offices around that Capitol. It's no wonder good people go to the Capitol and turn left. That's what surrounds them. We have a strategic legal center because we need to do the work of suing, of putting together legal actions, of bringing in teams, and sometimes working to find smarter ways to win our policies. You know, we all love Tabor, but we haven't quite seen that apparently there's a clause in Tabor that says whenever Tabor is challenged to the Supreme Court, taxpayers lose. So we've got to find ways to strengthen Tabor through different decisions and maybe through other parts of law. We have a C4 so that we can run campaigns, we can run issue committees so that we can get involved in the political process. The left owns the media. I will agree with Trump on this. And the media is shrinking and shrinking. That's why we have investigative reporters like Todd Shepard. And if you remember stories like when Hickenlooper said if he, even if he lost his re-election bid, he would still have 3 months to let the Chuck E. Cheese murderer have clemency so he wouldn't be put to death. Now, how is it we saw that and knew that information? CNN did an interview with Hickenlooper. He said it. CNN didn't air that little gem. Todd Shepard found the tape of that little gem. And I can give you 20 other stories of how that works. We build systems of distribution so that we're not relying on the media. That's why we do our Colorado Public Television TV show. It's why we do radio programs. It's why we're newspapers. It's why we're now so sophisticated in data collection and social media. We do these things because we know as we build these, we're building a system that is going to point Colorado back to where we need to be. We have a donor issue. Our donors are good guys, but they keep betting on people, and they have to continue to do that. But betting on candidates and not betting on an infrastructure, building it long term, is like building a wall of bricks but no mortar. It will never last. We are the mortar, the foundation to make all this work. And it's odd because so many of us feel that when we give to our churches, when we give to our hospitals, when we give to our colleges, we give with glee. You've seen names on buildings, you've seen hospital wings, you've seen things that have saved my children's lives because people in this room and people like us think about the long term. And they see that donation as an investment in the future. But when it comes to politics, we see those checks not as an investment, but as an expense. We see them like we see paying our auto insurance. Let's just do it as cheap as possible. What? I got to get him out of all. How much is it going to cost? Oh, God. Imagine if we could turn that mindset around. That this push for building a self-sustaining system for liberty is an investment in the future. Whether it's giving of time, energy, or resources. If we can make that mental change in Coloradans, we will win this back. There's nothing, and here's the last part. There's nothing they can do that we can't do with half as many people because we're not stoned all the time. Most of us are not stoned all the time. We have a plan. We will change this in Colorado, and it's because we work as that mortar to hold it together. Again, thank you for being here. I want to thank El Pomar for doing it. And I want to thank people like Megan Silverthorne who fights every day on the Dunco School Board. And remember, we're not just fighting the state capitol. There are 3,600 governments in Colorado. We are building plans for recruitment to get our people into those governments. That's why it's so important. I've been doing this now for 25 years in politics in one way or the other. This is going to sound odd. I am more optimistic about our ability to bring Colorado back than I have ever been. And that's from my particular weird vantage point in my foxhole. I see the possibility. It's like a running back who sees the opening. It's there, if only we take it. I want to thank you all very much.
So let's get a little optimism on PERA from State Treasurer Walker Stapleton, and a moment of, let me just take a moment of personal indulgence. I actually credit Walker Stapleton's rise as state treasurer to the fact that I nominated him at the state convention, which I'm pretty sure is why he won. So,
John said that the left owns the media. The left never owned Amy Oliver, and I can attest to that. When she was a member of the media and we would discuss PERA, I think they must have thought you were a little off kilter, Amy. But
true.
And now that you're working for Freedom's Shining Light at the Independence Institute, even better. But John, thank you for all the great work you do. I will say I'll take exception to just a tad smidgen of what John said, and that is our state is badly missing leadership from the governor's office. Our cities are missing leadership from the mayor's office, and if you look at the pension system and how it's played out in municipalities and states all over the country, it is required leadership from mayors and governors all across our country, and we are absolutely devoid of that leadership here in Colorado. 10 minutes to talk about PERA solvency. I could take 10 hours. Everybody would be either asleep or so incredibly depressed that I'm not sure where they would head after this. But we haven't made a lot of progress, unfortunately. I think the most salient piece of progress that we made have made during my years of fighting this battle against PERA is PERA lowering its rate of return from 8 to 7.5, which is a very small victory. It was a Pyrrhic victory. It was an 8 to 7 vote of the board, and they weren't happy about it because they knew that in so doing, their unfunded liability would increase by a few $1 billion. And I'll hit on some of the flashpoints of this topic here in Colorado, and then open it up to questioning. But I thought it was really interesting because over the last legislative session here in Colorado, there was a titanic battle over the hospital provider fee, as Jon Caldara is well aware, and whether that should be refunded to taxpayers through the Taxpayer Bill of Rights or whether it should be kept, as the governor's office wanted it to be kept. And Senators Hill and Lambert and the fearless Senator Cadman stood firm and made sure that the governor's office did not exempt this from the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Well, that big battle over the hospital provider fee had a budget implication to Colorado of approximately $150 million. The incredibly sad thing is that during the exact same period of time, PERA announced that it had returned 1.5% on its expected 7.5% rate of return, which meant that its bill to the state of Colorado increased by $2.2 billion in 1 year. $2.2 billion in 1 year. And nobody covered it. It wasn't so much as a byline in the paper. Nobody spoke about it in the governor's office, of course, and everybody just went about their business, which illustrates the continuing problem that this pension system is causing in the state of Colorado, and the pension system at large, as Jonathan pointed out, is causing all over the country. Jonathan uses a risk-free rate of return for treasuries in estimating liabilities, which would send most people off a cliff. In Colorado, even using the 7.5% rate of return, our pension system is 60% funded, which puts us in the bottom quartile of states around the country. And it's not just Jonathan's research, it's the Pew Center, the Milken Institute, the Brookings Institute, which is even a center-left Morningstar, which looks at pension liabilities. There's no good news. And I tell people every single day that I've been in the office as treasurer of Colorado, the unfunded liability of the pension system has only grown, literally only grown. And if you look at again, as Jonathan pointed out, about how pension systems crowd out other obligations, a couple years ago in Colorado, I was proud to lead the effort to defeat Amendment 66, the largest proposed tax increase in Colorado history. And I debated State Senator Mike Johnston because the governor decided to have Mike Johnston be the guy behind 66, and so I debated Mike Johnston all over the state of Colorado. And the point that I kept making to people is look, I've got 3 kids of my own. I'm an investor in the public education system just like you are, but I refuse to support a tax increase where most of the money will not go to increased computers in the classroom, better student-teacher ratios, more teachers, and instead will go to backfill unsustainable liabilities in a bankrupt public pension system. Because when I opposed 66, I didn't just oppose it, I went around the state and talked to school board members and superintendents, and almost to a person I heard the biggest albatross around our neck from a budget standpoint is mandatory unsustainable contributions to a bankrupt public pension system. I said, great, here's an idea. How about everybody sign up and we can circulate this, that you as a school superintendent are against this because you're worried about the pension system crowding out other priorities with your budget. And they said, I can't do that. I can't do that. The CEA that wouldn't like it very much. The CASE, the Colorado Association of School Executives, wouldn't appreciate my doing that. And so very few school superintendents spoke up about this. I would say the Douglas County School Board is an aberration. But let me just let me end with a picture here in Colorado of exactly the crowding out that Jonathan talked about, and that is, by January 1 of next year, I kept saying, a couple years ago that this was, far off into the future. People said we still, this is far off in the future, but it's here. By January 1 of next year, every single school district in the state of Colorado is required to contribute 20.5% of a teacher's salary into the pension system, whether they like it or not. Every school district in the state. In addition to that employer contribution from the school district, the teacher himself or herself is required to contribute 8%. And that is a result of Senate Bill 1, which passed before my time and allowed the pension system, unfortunately some Republicans were complicit in passing this, but it allowed the pension system to say, hey look, we fixed our pension problems in Colorado, we're on a path towards solvency, nothing else needs to be done, leave us alone. And if you look at the status quo of Senate Bill 1, it's requiring 28% in contributions for a retirement system. Anybody in the private sector can tell you that's 4 to 5 times as expensive today as any system that you would find in the private sector. But the really scary thing is that Senate Bill 1 was based on PERA achieving an 8% rate of return. And that reality has already changed during my time as treasurer down to 7.5, and it should be a lot lower than that. And the way that pension accounting is played at the state and municipal levels is you assume lollipops and rainbows in terms of investment assumptions, and then you pervasively underfund the plan until, in accounting terms, a deferred liability builds up at the school district level or the city level, and somebody eventually has to cry uncle. And structurally, government has done a crappy job of addressing this issue in a proactive manner. They've only addressed it in a reactive manner, which makes no sense from a business standpoint. It would be like my saying, hey John, let's let our business go into chapter 11 and then we'll figure out how to refine and change our sales process. Who thinks that way? But if you look at Jefferson County, Alabama, Kingston, Rhode Island, Detroit, Michigan, Chicago, Illinois, San Bernardino, California, they had to go down the tubes and go down the gutter, literally, fiscally, before they actually changed their system. And so at some point, as the rate of return gets more and more realistic for the pension system, they know that they're going to have to go back to the legislature and ask for more money. And the way, unfortunately, that the incentive contracts are structured for the people in our pension system, they have no responsibility or accountability for missing investment targets. And in the last 2 months, both the Chief Investment Officer and Chief Financial Officer of PERA have retired. They're not of Social Security retirement age, they're of PERA retirement age. And the CEO of the pension system, his contract runs out in 2018. And hopefully, if there's a Republican governor in Colorado, he can run right out the door. Thank you very much.
We have heard about the Douglas County School Board, and I failed to mention the elected chair of the Douglas County School Board, Megan Silverthorne. So Megan, thank you so much. All right, we have a few minutes for questions, if anybody has any specific questions.
How did they get that 7.5% return number when the true return on the S&P since 2001 is only 2.95%? How can they trip or double what the market's actually returned? That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Right. As Jonathan can talk about too, a lot of the problems are problems of governance that have been around for a long period of time. And in Colorado, the particular problem with governance is you have a 15-member board. 12 of the 15 members have an entrenched economic interest in defending the status quo at all costs. The board sets the rate of return. These 12 of the 15 board members are required to have no financial experience whatsoever, but they are required to be members of the system. And so it turns out when you're asking people to make sacrifices, and I didn't have time to get into the solutions because there are solutions. If you look at what Chuck Reed, a Democratic mayor, did in San Jose, or Democrats, ironically, because they've been in positions that Republicans haven't at the municipal and state level, have led pension reform. Gina Raimondo in Rhode Island have led changes to this system. But structurally, if you ask somebody who has a vested economic interest to make a sacrifice, usually that person is thinking of their neighbor's sacrifice as opposed to their own.
I know that some financial advisors will give, private individuals economic models that when the market goes up, they get in as it goes up, and then when it goes down, it doesn't go down quite as low as maybe if you're trying to play the market. Is there any relation between like a private financial advisor's advice and what PERA could take as an advice?
And Treasurer Stapleton, you should not have sat down.
Yeah, really.
I'd like to say the difference between private advice versus government advice. And by the way, we can ask questions of the other two as well.
Okay.
I would say that the benefit that PERA has in maintaining the status quo is they have a lot of money, a lot of retirees' money, and they use that money to hire actuaries. I'm glad this is being recorded. I hope they play this for the new board member orientation. And they use that money to hire actuaries and investment advisors who have a particular opinion. And the great thing about a financial model is that if you change inputs, the outputs can change markedly. And so they use assumptions. For instance, they'll use rates of inflation, which are way above where inflation has been over the last 20 years. At a board meeting last year, and this is all public record, at a board meeting last year, PERA's investment advisor said, we're assuming that state salaries compound and grow by 4% annually. I said, hey, I've been in office now for 6 years, and my state salary hasn't grown by even close to that, cumulatively, not only year after year after year. So they use assumptions that are erroneous on purpose to in order to buttress this inflated rate of return, which most economists and most people with common sense will tell you is totally unachievable. And structurally, if you look at PERA's portfolio, you have a $42 billion portfolio that has 25% of its investments in fixed income. And most people know that fixed income is not doing that great as people are fleeing, yields are compressed. But if you have 25% of your portfolio in fixed income that's returning 1.5% to 2.5%, it doesn't take a Nobel laureate in math to figure out that the rest of the portfolio has to achieve 9 or 9.5 or 10 in order to average out this 7.5, 8% rate of return. And the last thing I'll say, and this has been a huge frustration of mine, and I'm sure of yours being in Washington, D.C., the Government Accounting Standards Board has done a terrible job of monitoring disclosures of public pension systems across the United States. They are nothing like the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which governs private disclosures, because they have refused to adopt any sort of universal discount rate for a pension system's liabilities. And so California could be at 8, Colorado at 7, Indiana at 6. It's impossible to make heads or tails over how unfunded pension liabilities impact state credit when everybody is using different financial assumptions. And they have allowed this to be permissible, which is inexcusable.
That's exactly right, and just a couple of things I would amplify on that is when it comes to pension accounting, it's the Wild West. I don't think I called it this earlier, but it's basically Enron-style accounting for state and local governments, where literally, I mean, if you're in the private sector as a financial officer or CEO signing off on financial statements, you would be in prison using the kind of the lax standards that state and local governments sometimes use. Those were great examples. A couple of the others that I have seen across the states is, it's basically government's playing God and assuming that people are going to work longer and therefore pay more into the system, and then when they retire, they assume they die. Things like that. I mean, this is, I wish I was making this up, but this is not. I mean, this is actually really stuff that happens out there.
We can make that happen, by the way.
Well, and then there's the issue of playing politics. Whenever government is in the pension business, in this case, there's the allure with all these billions of dollars sitting there as prepaid assets into the system to play politics with those assets, with investment decisions. And so, because of GASB's lax standards, there's really no policing outside of the bond rating agencies, and that's kind of on a voluntary basis for states to comply to keep bond ratings. Some of the things we're seeing is states are, let's say, investing in eco-devo projects to benefit local firms that have connections to the board or for different things like that. In Alabama, for instance, we just uncovered that they're investing in golf courses with pensioners' dollars and getting horrible returns on that. And then there's been this movement to divest from certain industries that state government doesn't like. So oil and gas, coal, gun manufacturers, you go down that list, and states are looking to divest from those things out of their portfolio, and by the way, sacrificing important returns that will be the only thing that keeps these pension plans afloat.
If I could add something to that, bringing it back to what we do at Independence Institute, one of the things that Walker and I have talked about are reforms on PERA. Simple reforms like saying PERA retirees can retire at the same age as Social Security retirees can retire. But in order for us to do that, it will never get through the Colorado State Legislature. It's why we need to keep our weapons available for other means of getting what we've done, which is why we stand out and sometimes disagree with our friends on things like Amendment 71, which is on the ballot. I'll just take 2 seconds on this, which is if the idea of Amendment 71 is to make constitutional amendments harder to get on and harder to pass. By the way, I think those are reasonable things to do. In reality, what it's done is it takes away that ability. I've been doing initiatives for 25 years. This is one of the most dangerous changes in the constitutional law I've ever seen. If passed, we will never be able to get anything on the constitutional ballot ever again. Now, other folks might be able to do so, but we keep hearing that TABOR is the gold standard. Without, if Amendment 71 was there would be no TABOR. There would be no term limits. There would be no ban on public funding of abortions. There would be no transparency laws. Without that weapon, we're lost. And I don't know if you've read, you have to read the fine print on these, as you've been talking about the fine print on financials. It changes the rules of signature gathering from percentage of active voters to percentage of registered voters. that registered voting, that you can game the system. You might recall when I lived in Colorado Springs and registered here. And by the way, I miss my hometown in Colorado Springs so much. Those are the best 2 days of my life. And so you think about this, most districts have about, what, 75,000 registered voters. My hometown of Boulder, that district, there are 133,000 registered voters. We are going to give a veto to Boulder and Fort Collins and other places that can play fast and loose with these things. It also fossilizes what we have in the Constitution. The bad court decisions we've had on Tabor, that you don't have to go to the people for a fee increase, as long as you call it a fee, not a tax. You don't have to go and talk to them about a certificate of participation, even though it's really debt. All these things are now fossilized into Tabor, which means we'll never be able to go back there and repair Tabor to what it should be, should this pass. But the dirty little secret is, in order to repeal Tabor completely, they don't need the supermajority vote. They can do it with a simple minority vote. That's why Al Yates and Dan Ritchie and others are behind this. And I hate to see good conservatives, again, working for a liberal agenda when they don't know. Anyway.
All right, I think we are out of time, but I want to thank everybody for coming. Please take your complimentary copy of Rich States, Poor States. That's the 8th edition. I believe the 9th edition is available online.
Preview online.
A preview online, so you get a sneak preview. Feel free to send comments back to Jonathan. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to Treasurer Stapleton for speaking, Jonathan Williams for your partnership on this with ALEC, and of course El Pamar and Joe Woodford as well. I think our speakers will be here for a few moments, so if you've got some questions for them, feel free to ask them. Also, a big thank you to our state lawmakers who are doing the hard work. I'm sure they would love to usher through some of these reforms, and I'm sure they have ideas on how you can help them do that. So thank you all for being here. If you want more information on the Independence Institute, it's independenceinstitute.org. Come see us at the Freedom Embassy.